What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us for this Week 18 lineup show. We are live on the SportsEthos YouTube channel. My name is Joe Orrico, and I am your host, joined today, as always, by my co-host, Steve Vidovich. Steve, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good. Like we talked about before, I've restricted access, so I can't even click the little red button in the top right corner after learning my lesson last week. But doing good. Excited to talk some hoops and get ready for the All-Star break.
For those of you who might have missed our extensive coverage of the trade deadline, just a bit of background. Steve clicked the wrong button on the broadcast. We had to start over, and I had no idea that any of this had happened. I joined the show, I think, in the third hour that we were on, and Steve was there from the onset. And when Steve was leaving, instead of leaving studio, he like ended the broadcast. And later on, Dan mentioned this, and I had no idea it was Steve. And I said, "Oh, if someone screwed up there, it was probably Steve," just to make a joke at him, without realizing that Steve had actually clicked it. So, Steve, I apologize for that, but it's all in good fun at this point. We can laugh about it. It's a fun week in the NBA. I should say couple of weeks, because we're kind of talk about the next 2 weeks back to back here with the All-Star break jammed in the middle. Obviously, there's some players who have gained value and lost value with the trade deadline. We're going to talk through all of that. If you guys are listening here, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. We're doing a ton of stuff. I've been doing my live Fantasy MLB Today shows. Doing a couple of week live whenever I have a guest on. We've been doing them earlier today. I was on with James Anderson from RotoWire. We're talking Milwaukee Brewers. That one is just down in your feed if you want to go check that one out. But like and subscribe. You never miss any of these new great videos that we got going out. Pretty much every single day we got some stuff on YouTube. So make sure you're around for the ride there. But Steve, what do you got so far for us in terms of the schedule notes? We know before we kick off, usually you let us know what your thoughts are on schedule analysis, any players or teams that have advantages or disadvantages. What are you seeing for Week 18?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a combo week with the All-Star break. A lot of formats go Monday through Thursday of this week, and then follow that up with Thursday to Sunday of the following week after the All-Star break. So I'm going to kind of I'll do each week by itself first, and then do them together. For this week, we have four teams that just play one game between Monday and Thursday. That's the Detroit Pistons, Memphis Grizzlies, Sacramento Kings, and Toronto Raptors. So all of those teams just have one game this week. And then there are two teams that have three games. That's the Chicago Bulls and the Washington Wizards have three games over the next 4 days. That means that each of them has at least one back-to-back, or exactly one back-to-back. The Bulls back-to-back falls at the end, Wednesday, Thursday, and then the Wizards play a back-to-back starting tonight in Golden State. So definitely be aware of those teams on back-to-backs. We already got word that Kuzma's out, and we might see him Tuesday, but we consider him questionable for that game as of now. All the other teams have two games this week. Then the following week, we have another two teams that have three games, and that's the Pistons and the Detroit Pistons and the Memphis Grizzlies. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? The Detroit Pistons and the Memphis Grizzlies have the worst two schedules over the next 2 weeks, because they only have three games over the next 14 days. So from today until the following Sunday, the Pistons and the Grizzlies only have a total of three games. So those are the teams to stay away from. There are about six teams that have five games over the next 2 weeks. And that's going to be those Chicago Bulls and the Washington Wizards. They, like I said, play three games this week and then two after the break. And then you got the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Golden State Warriors, the Denver Nuggets, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So those are the teams to target in 5-game weeks. All of those teams have a back-to-back during that stretch. The Warriors in particular have two back-to-backs. So the Warriors are a good play, except for Klay Thompson. That 5-game week actually gets reduced to a likely 3-game week with two back-to-backs coming up. So put Klay in that 3-game week along with everybody on the Detroit Pistons and the Memphis Grizzlies. Those are the teams that you want to be staying away from if you're deciding between like some fringe streams at the end of rosters and weekly lineup settings. And then in terms of the days of the week and game schedules, the only really light days, Thursday of the All-Star break of this week, we only have 3 games. And then Tuesday, we have 5 games. Every other day, we have at least 7 games over the next 14 days, with today's slate being the biggest of all of them with 11 games tonight.
Probably not the easiest to stream over these next couple of days anyway. It's always a little bit weird when there is a double week. It's kind of fun, and you tend to look at your accumulated stats, and they end up being a bit higher for the week. But it does make it a little bit tricky to plan things out. There's like how long is the All Star break? 5 days, 6 days for the All Star break?
I think 6 days in
Something like
total, 6 days without games.
so yeah, it does make it a little bit tricky, but we are going to be here for the next half hour or so. Throw your questions into the chat, whether it's regarding pickups and drops, players to start this week or sit, whether it's trades, whatever you guys got. We are going to be here. Ethan, appreciate the kind words over in the chat on YouTube. Anything else, Steve, in terms of like maybe particular players over the deadline that you've really maybe grown interested in because of their new roles, or say a player got shipped out of town, Mark Williams, or maybe anybody that you want to discuss here before we really get some questions going, just in terms of players that you think we should be adding, maybe.
Yeah, Mark Williams, absolute ad. I think he's likely on most rosters. I'll get into a few of the lesser talked about names throughout the trade deadline. One guy that played over the weekend had his Lakers debut and performed much better than Malik Beasley, who I think missed all 7 of his 3-point attempts in that game against the Warriors. That's Jared Vanderbilt. He looked really good in his debut. We don't have like the full roster available with him because LeBron sat out for a second game, and LeBron's out again tonight versus the Blazers, which puts Vanderbilt in a prime position to deliver again across specifically category formats, but he could even have some low end value in points leagues. I like adding him, especially in deeper formats. Shallow leagues, I'm a little bit curious to see what he looks like with LeBron available. But with LeBron out, Vanderbilt definitely must stream option for me tonight. And I even think he could play enough to deliver low end value the rest of the season. Mo Bamba is another like obstacle in his way, and it'll be interesting to monitor the front court rotation over the next, I would say, let's say 2 weeks. Let's say by the Sunday after the All-Star break, that will likely give us enough of a sample size to see what Vanderbilt's role is. A guy who has yet to make his debut for a team that I like a decent amount, and I think he could grab hold of a starting job. That's Matisse Thybulle. That's not a points league guy at all, but in category formats, I really think that Thybulle could be in line for defensive specialist appeal rest of season. He's an interesting guy to monitor. In points leagues, Devontae Graham could be an interesting guy. We saw him like pop off with 30 points in his Spurs debut on Friday. He's an interesting guy to monitor. I think when Trey Jones gets back, that'll really put a damper into his value. But he's a guy who could score a lot, pretty bad field goal percentage. So that's hard to roster in a decent amount of category league settings. But Graham is another guy I'd consider specifically in points leagues.
All those names definitely make sense. Whenever we do this, I always say go back and listen a couple times because we go through a bunch of stuff here in the first 10 minutes that it's a lot. Either you're taking notes or you got to listen back because tons of fantastic information that Steve just threw out there. We did not mention our favorite person in the universe to start off this show. Apologies to the Jonathan Isaac stands out there. Now, he has not been great. I mean, the minutes have been slightly increased as the light flickers there, as it tends to do. That's my trademark at this point. I don't know if we're ever going to get the damn thing fixed. But Jonathan Isaac, I mean, the funny thing is, before he played a game,
They probably heard you talking about Jonathan Isaac, and that's why the light
yeah,
flickered, right? I mean, it
the
was
spirits
perfect timing.
know. They know there's got to be some kind of ghost presence with Jonathan Isaac. If any baseball people listening, Sixto Sanchez for the Marlins, pretty much the same damn thing with Jonathan Isaac, like multiple years without any news at all. With Jonathan Isaac, though, the funny thing for me is that people were rostering him more so before he was playing. It was like the thought of maybe down the line he has, some value, but that was before he'd even played. He was like 30+% rostered in Yahoo. Now he's at 16. He's been playing for the last couple of weeks, and the minutes are slowly ramping up. Like when we were talking last week, we're looking at 9 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, and that's turned into like 11, 12, and 14. Is there any hope that by the end of the season, and we're approaching it pretty quickly at this point, is there any chance that he has any fantasy value? I'm doubting it, but I don't know. Are you holding on to him anywhere, maybe deeper leagues?
I'm not personally holding on to him, but I do think it's definitely possible. I wouldn't be betting on it, but I mean, 14 minutes, 15 seconds in his last game, that's significantly higher than any other minute total he's had so far this season. We've seen him get like a 3 steal game. If we ever see him get to that like 20-minute range, then we're maybe cooking with fire there in terms of his fantasy value as like a defensive specialist who can also be a good per minute rebounder. He doesn't have the best jump shot, and I don't really think that is going to be like his calling card by any means, but he could shoot the ball with some efficiency and not drag your percentages. So if we get him into the 20-minute range, it's possible. Would I be betting on it? No. He's a guy I would definitely watch in shallow formats without picking him up unless you want the luxury of luxury stashes. But I would be watching him, and then deeper leagues, he could be worth a speculative ad. I'm not doing it personally, but I could see it happening. Curious to see how Chuma Okeke, how his return will negatively impact, or if it will negatively impact Isaac's rotation or role, because I think Okeke hasn't played with Isaac. I don't know if they played together in that game against the Heat over the weekend. I don't think so. I think he's going to be making his return tonight. Is it or?
I'm not sure. Let me see.
I know he's not on the injury report. And yeah, the Magic do play tonight. So that's somebody I would be a little bit concerned about. I think that they overlap quite a bit with their skill sets.
I'm still kind of in the same place with Isaac as I was a week ago and where I've been the last few weeks. He's probably somebody, if you're at the top of the standings, you're guaranteed a playoff spot, or, even if it's Roto, if you're already way ahead of the pack, well, maybe not so much in Roto. I think he's probably more of a head-to-head stash, at the hopes that maybe the last couple of weeks we could see 20 minutes or so. This last week wasn't as nice fantasy-wise, but last week he was giving you like top 180 fantasy value from like 10 minutes a game. So that's where my hope comes from, is that you double those 10 minutes. Could he be a top 100 player in 20 minutes? Probably not. But there's an outside chance of it still, I think, with the skill set, even if he's just a defensive specialist. That being said, I'm not holding him unless I am top of the standings. If you are, any chance that you're going to miss the playoffs, or you're still fighting from an outsider's point of view to get in, he's not somebody who over these next 2 weeks is likely to make a huge dent. But, maybe give it 3-4 weeks, he could make some noise for you. I'm not really there yet, but if you are way out ahead of everybody else and you can put him on your bench, then hell, I don't think you're losing too much depending on who it is you're dropping. Guys, remember, throw your questions into the chat. We're going to be going the next 20 or so minutes. Any kinds of questions you got regarding basketball, hell, football, baseball, we're here. We cover it all. But we're specifically going to be looking at lineup questions if you guys have them. Of course, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. We got a question from a fellow Joseph here. What do we do with Devin Vassell or Zion when playoff starts week 21? Zion setback seems concerning. It is very concerning for me. They're both very concerning, and it's hard to say 3 weeks out, but Vassell is without a timeline right now, so I don't think that he is likely to be back in 3 weeks. Zion, they're saying he's out indefinitely, so I'm not really optimistic that we see either one of these guys when your playoffs are going to start in week 21. I wouldn't necessarily be dropping them yet, but I don't think the outlook is too rosy at the moment. Steve, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, thoughts are the emoji is perfect there. I mean, it's really unfortunate with both guys. Hopefully, you have an IR spot, or hopefully, you have 2 IR spots, and you could just keep them there. Vassell's situation is different than Zion in that the Spurs are not playing for anything other than player development, and they're definitely not going to rush anyone back with any sort of injury unless they're absolutely 100%. So that's the reason why his, timeline from that procedure he had, what I think we're looking at like a month and a half ago is probably when that occurred. So I would be nervous about both guys. One thing you could do is you could try to shop them, but you're not going to get anywhere close to equal value for either, even if you try to like shop them to person who's at the top of your league. Uh, I would say that if you have IR spots, slot them both in those IR spots. If you don't have IR spots and you're struggling to make the playoffs, I think you have to try to see what kind of return you could get for either guy. That's what I would be doing right now with both guys in that situation. But I hope you have IR spots. Getting to know a little bit more about your league settings would be helpful in us answering your question here.
I I don't know that you're going to be able. I mean, you could try trading them. I just think people are going to offer you the worst player on their roster, or maybe the two worst players on their roster. And at that point, it does depend on the depth of your league. If that's the worst players in the 10-team league versus 12 and beyond, it's a different situation. I don't see people really giving you something that's going to make it worthwhile, like the replacement level value that you're going to get in a trade versus the hope of fully healthy Zion or Vassell. It depends on your preference for taking risk. Like maybe somebody would take Zion, but you might be getting like, the 120th ranked player or something for him at this point. And then, I don't know, where would be your cutoff for accepting a trade for Zion? Would it be top 120, top 150? Like 150 at that point, not much value, but where's the line for you?
I would try to get somebody who's not currently inside of the top 90, but who you think will be in the top 90 rest of season. That's kind of like what I would shoot for, and that's only if I didn't have IR spots to put him on specifically. Vassell, I think, has even less value, and I would take significantly less for him. Or if I didn't have an IR spot, would even consider dropping him if I'm struggling to make the playoffs. Obviously, everything is situational. If you're comfortably sitting in your playoffs, you can stomach the missed games right now, then I would prefer that route. But with trade deadlines and fantasy leagues likely approaching in the next few days, if they haven't already passed, I would look to try and deal him for somebody who has like rest of season value. If we are dealing with IR spots, I wouldn't even try to trade them. I would just sit on both of them in the hopes that we get positive news later on.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. You're not going to get the value you should. You should probably just hang on at this point. Please rank these guys rest of season lunch lady. So we got Kelly Olynyk, Big Al Horford, Jared Vanderbilt, and Kyle Anderson. That's tricky. We're talking about guys who are generally within a similar range of each other. I think I'd probably prefer Horford at the top there. Horford, Vanderbilt, probably Olynyk, and then Anderson. It's close. How would you rank them, Steve?
Yeah, this is really, really close. I would say that like there's two different ways of ranking these players. One way would be for your fantasy floors. And I like what you said there with Big Al. I think he's like one of the guys that gives you a safer floor. My opinion, Kyle Anderson probably gives you the safest floor until Karl Anthony Towns returns from his injury. So like a short-term floor, I would go with Anderson, but rest of season floor, give me Al Horford and Olynyk in that order there for rest of season. Short term, I like slow-mo a little bit more. And then a little bit more upside, I do like Vanderbilt. I think there's a lot more risk baked in there. So because of what I said at the top of the show with that front court rotation, we haven't seen him play with LeBron and Bamba. So Vanderbilt would be last in terms of like if we're going like safety net. If we're going upside, I would bring probably Vanderbilt and Olynyk towards the top over Al Horford, only upside hunting. And then slow-mo's right there, but I think slow-mo is going to fall off at some point if and when Karl Anthony Towns returns.
Yeah, slow mo just kind of worries me. Like you do see really good games from him, but you also might see like, what was it the other day? It was 4 points, 3 rebounds. Like there's a bit of inconsistency there with me. I think my preference would be Horford either way. And then it's the other guys, I think for me personally, are just a half step behind him in terms of how safe I would personally feel. But I agree with what you said. The upside there at Vanderbilt, it's a little crowded for him. And with Olynyk, I like Olynyk. He's fine, I guess. I just don't really get that excited about him. I'm not sure where he is like in terms of ranking right now. Let me just pull that up. Like he's just outside the top 100. He's okay. He just doesn't really excite me all that much, even though there's maybe potential for a bit more. Not terribly exciting with Olynyk or with Kyle Anderson. For me personally, I would go with Horford, and then I do like the upside of Vanderbilt still, but it's a tricky question. These guys are all within probably 20 or 25 ranking spots of each other. It really does depend on your ability to take risks or your willingness to take risks, and also maybe what specific categories you are looking for there. But guys, let us know any other questions you have here before we sign off. We'll probably go another 10 or 15 minutes depending on the activity level from you guys. Just a reminder again, if you're just joining the show, hit the subscribe button, like the video. We're here every Monday, and we'll be here every Monday until the rest of the season, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, and you get all kinds of other great stuff on our YouTube. Dan Vespers is doing shows here live most days, probably 3 or 4 days a week anyway. He's doing a live show. I'm going to be doing a couple shows a week here as well on our YouTube channel. So make sure you do hit the subscribe button on your way out. And of course, like the video so other people can see it, maybe after you've already seen it and set your rosters for the week so you can get a half step ahead of everybody else. Steve, is there anything we haven't touched on yet? We talked about Jonathan Isaac. We talked about the lineups. We talked about the schedule. Is there anything that we need to mention or maybe specific players you want to mention still?
Yeah, I do something on Twitter 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I missed Thursdays because of the trade deadline madness. But I like to give out some dark horse picks. So I do that on our Discord channel, and then I share it to Twitter close to tip off. But I'll give out a couple of guys that I'm interested in for tonight's slate that are on less than 9% or less of Yahoo rosters. So first up is a guy on the Charlotte Hornets who we talked about like trade deadline winners, and this guy could be a possible trade deadline winner, and that's Dennis Smith Jr. He plays the same position as Terry Rozier and LaMelo Ball in Charlotte, but I think that the departure of Jalen McDaniels could positively impact his opportunity coming off the bench for Charlotte. He's played really well in their last two games. I think he'd be a great category league guy in particular because of the defensive production that he brings with some decent peripherals to go along with it. That's a guy I like for tonight's card and a possible low-end trade deadline winner. Obviously, if any injury were to strike to Rozier or Ball, then his value would skyrocket up the board to like a must-stream territory. But right now, he's in that dark horse stream zone for me tonight. Then with Jeremy Grant of the Portland Trailblazers, he's ruled out tonight with a concussion. So I gave out a couple of Blazers. One guy we already mentioned, that's Matisse Thybulle. I kind of like him rest of season as a defensive specialist. Obviously, there's some risk baked in because we don't know what his role is. I just figure that with the Blazers trading for Matisse Thybulle from the Sixers, in particular, they didn't like in the Cam Reddish deal, they acquired a first-round pick on top of Reddish. In the Thybulle deal, they just acquired Matisse. So I think that he could be in line for that starting role that Josh Hart had when he left town. And I think Thybulle is a great source of defensive stats. He's the guy I would be adding rest of season. It's a little bit riskier tonight in his Blazers debut, but I like him. Another guy on the Blazers, the last dark horse pick of the day, is Trendon Watford of the Blazers. He's a guy who could give you good rebounds, solid efficiency, decent scoring. Doesn't typically deliver defensive stats. He can knock down a three or two, but hopefully he can give you one steal or one block to go with some solid scoring and rebounding tonight. So those are the dark horse streams I'll give out here before I post them on Twitter for tonight's slate. And Thibault in particular is an interesting speculative ad for me in 9 cat and 8 cat leagues.
Yeah, he's off the injury report. We'll see what kind of role he has, but I've always been a big Thibault fan. I think he does a little bit of everything. I don't think he's as willing to shoot the three as we might like, but he can give you a couple of those. Spattering of stats across the board. Obviously, defensive specialist. I really like that. And Trenton Watford last year for me was a huge pickup, and maybe he can be again this season, depending on what we see unfold over these next couple of weeks. But Steve, great work as always. We are going to wrap it up there, I think, because the chat's kind of dying out at this point. But appreciate you guys hanging out with us. We're going to be here, like I said, every Monday for the rest of the season. We've been here every single Monday. I've missed a couple. Steve's missed one or two. But we hope we've been able to help you guys out throughout these 18 weeks, which is it's just crazy. As a side note, that the NBA season is already in week 18. It feels like the B150 came out yesterday, but we're right around the corner from the playoffs and fantasy playoffs. And from the real life playoffs as well, guys. Appreciate you hanging out. Hit the subscribe and like buttons on your way out the door. And we'll see you again next week. Cheers, everybody.